The crowd murmured, shocked by the open hostility. This was no longer amusing sport, it was brutal. Throwing money at her like that after a performance that had clearly transcended the crass terms of his dare was the ultimate sign of disrespect. He was trying to reassert his dominance, to reduce her art back to a transaction, to remind her that in his world she was still just the help. Cassie looked down at the $100 bills littering the plush carpet around her socked feet. $10,000. It was a life-changing amount of money. It was security. It was a solution to so many of her problems. She could feel the practical, desperate part of her brain screaming at her to bend down, to gather the notes, to swallow this final indignity for the sake of survival. But then she looked up at Preston's face. She saw no remorse, no respect, only the bitter fury of a spoiled child who had lost a game. And she knew she couldn't take it. To take that money now would be to validate his worldview. It would mean that her pride, her talent, her soul, everything she had just reclaimed on that dance floor had a price tag. And that price was $10,000. With a calmness that stunned even herself, she looked Preston directly in the eye. Her voice, when she spoke, was not loud, but it cut through the silence of the ballroom with the precision of a scalpel. "I think you misunderstand," she said clearly. "I didn't dance for your money. I danced for me." She took a small step back away from the scattered bills. "My art is not for sale." She held his gaze for a beat longer, letting the weight of her words settle. Then, without another glance at the money, she turned her back on him. With her head held high, she walked off the improvised dance floor, her bare feet silent on the carpet. She moved past the stunned tables, past the gaping faces of Veronica, Chad, and Bryce. She walked directly to the service stand, picked up her folded apron and her clunky, sensible shoes. She didn't run. She didn't scurry. She walked with the unhurried grace of a queen, abdicating a throne she never wanted. As she reached the service door leading to the kitchens, she passed Mrs. Peterson. "Riley," the manager started, her voice choked with a mixture of pride and terror. Cassie gave her a small, weary smile. "It's okay, Miss Peterson. I think I quit." She pushed open the door and disappeared into the clatter and steam of the back of the house, leaving a stunned ballroom, a humiliated billionaire, and $10,000 lying untouched on the floor. The silence Preston's outburst had created was broken by a new sound. It was the distinct, cultured voice of a man in his late 60s sitting at a table near the dance floor. "Well," the man said to his companion, his voice carrying in the still air, "that was the most exciting thing to happen at one of these dreary events in 20 years. He was Gregory Bishop, the legendary and notoriously difficult-to-please choreographer and director whose shows had dominated Broadway for 3 decades. He had been on the verge of leaving, bored to tears by the vapid speeches and overwrought food. Now he was leaning forward, his eyes alight with a professional interest he hadn't felt in years. He had not just seen a waitress outdance a rich fool. He had seen technique. He had seen passion. He had seen raw, untamed star power. More than that, he recognized something in her style, the clean lines, the emotional intensity. It was the signature of a specific training, a specific school. He turned to his assistant. "Find out who that girl is," he commanded. "I don't care what it takes. Get me her name. I want to see her tomorrow." Meanwhile, Preston Montgomery III stood frozen amidst the wreckage of his ego. His fiancée, Veronica, finally came to his side, her touch on his arm hesitant. "Preston, let's just go," she whispered, her face pale. The fun had curdled. The crowd was no longer looking at him with admiration, but with something between pity and contempt. His attempt to be the evening's alpha male had backfired spectacularly, painting him as both a bully and a fool. He shook her hand off. His eyes were fixed on the service door through which Cassie had vanished. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot coil in his gut. It wasn't over. He didn't know how, but he would make her pay for this. Not with money, but with ruin. The Montgomery family did not tolerate being embarrassed. Unseen by Preston, Nate Crow was already scrolling through the images on his camera's display. He had it all. The arrogant dare, the discarded shoes, the explosive dance, the look of fury on Preston's face, the defiant turn of Cassie's back, the money on the floor. He knew this was more than just a set of candid party photos. This was a narrative, the story of David and Goliath played out in tuxedos. Looked up from his camera, a slow grin spreading across his face. He had the story of the year, and he knew exactly what the headline would be. The internet moves faster than gossip and with more devastating force. By 8 a.m. the next morning, Nate Crow's story, which he'd sold to the online journalism outlet BuzzFeed News for a handsome sum, had gone supernova. It wasn't buried in the society section. It was the lead story on their homepage, complete with Nate's most dramatic photos. The headline was simple, devastating, and utterly clickable. Montgomery air dares Waitress to dance for $10K. She wipes the floor with him and walks away from the cash. The article itself was a masterclass in narrative journalism. Nate had laid out the scene perfectly. The opulent charity gala, the swaggering billionaire, the quiet waitress. He detailed the dare, the contemptuous way Preston had thrown the money, and Cassie's powerful, dignified refusal. But the photos were the kill shot. There was a triptych that was being shared on every social media platform. The first photo showed Preston smirking, fanning the cash. The second was a breathtaking motion-blurred shot of Cassie in the middle of the dance, her form of study and passionate grace, while Preston looked on with dawning horror. The third and most damning photo was of Cassie's back as she walked away, leaving the $10,000 scattered on the floor at Preston's feet. By 9 Jersey, Gala Dancer was the #1 trending topic on Twitter. Montgomery's shame was not far behind. For Cassie, the morning was a bewildering storm. She had woken up on the lumpy mattress in her small Queens apartment. The adrenaline of the night before replaced by annoying anxiety. She had quit her job. She had made a powerful enemy. She had walked away from more money than she'd seen in her life. The cold light of day made her actions feel reckless, not heroic. Her mother's prescription needed refilling next week. How was she going to pay for it now? Her phone, a cheap model with a cracked screen, buzzed on her nightstand. It was a text from a former coworker. "OMG, Cassie, are you seeing this?" Then it buzzed and again. Calls from numbers she didn't recognize. Texts from people she hadn't spoken to in years. She opened the link her friend had sent, and her world tilted on its axis. She saw herself, her face, her story, splashed across the screen for the entire world to see. She read the article, her heart pounding. The comments section was a tidal wave of support. This is the queen we need. Preston Montgomery III is what happens when you have money instead of a personality. Someone find this woman and give her a Broadway show right now. She didn't just walk away from the money. She walked away with his dignity. It was surreal. Yesterday, she was invisible. Today, she was a symbol. Her personal details weren't in the article, but the internet is a formidable detective. By noon, amateur sleuths had figured out her name. A GoFundMe page was started by a complete stranger with the title, "A Tip Jar for the Gala Dancer." It had a goal of $10,000. By 3 hours p.m., it had surpassed 50,000. Meanwhile, in a penthouse office overlooking Central Park, the atmosphere was considerably less celebratory. Preston Montgomery Jr., a man far more ruthless and intelligent than his son, slammed his fist on his mahogany desk, causing a collection of priceless jade figurines to rattle. The New York Post was spread before him, its cover featuring Nate's photo of his son looking humiliated under the blaring headline, "Tango of the Tyrant." "What in the hell were you thinking?" he roared. His son, Preston III, stood before him pale and defiant. "She embarrassed me, Dad," Preston III mumbled. "It was a joke that got out of hand." "A joke?" his father bellowed, standing up. He was shorter than his son, but carried an aura of such immense cold power that he seemed to fill the room. "Our stock dropped 4% on the pre-market, you idiot. 4%. All because you couldn't resist bullying a waitress? We are fielding calls from board members, from investors. The St. Jude's Foundation has issued a statement condemning your behavior and reviewing their association with the Montgomery name. You didn't just get outdanced, you took a multi-billion-dollar sledgehammer to our family's reputation." Veronica had already called off the engagement. Her statement to the press cited Preston's shocking and cruel behavior as irreconcilable with her own values, a masterful act of self-preservation. Chad and Bryce weren't answering his calls. He was an island and the tide of public opinion was rising fast. "I'll fix it," Preston III said, his voice weak. "You'll fix nothing," his father snapped. "You are to go to your apartment and stay there. You will not speak to the press. You will not post on social media. You will do nothing until I tell you. Your public life is over for the foreseeable future. Now get out." Humiliated for the second time in less than 24 hours, Preston Montgomery III slunk out of his father's office. Back in Queens, Cassie's day took another surreal turn. Around 4 p.m., there was a knock on her door. Peeking through the peephole, she saw a woman in a sharp, expensive-looking suit. Cautiously, Cassie opened the door. "Cassandra Riley?" the woman asked. Her tone was professional, not intrusive. "Yes, my name is Monica Vance. I'm the personal assistant to Mr. Gregory Bishop." Cassie's mind went blank. Gregory Bishop? The Gregory Bishop? The genius behind Crimson Corset and Asphalt Sonnets? It didn't seem possible. Mr. Bishop was in attendance at the gala last night. Monica continued, her expression unreadable. "He was, very impressed by your performance. He has asked to meet with you tomorrow morning, 10 a.m., at his studio in the theater district if you're amenable." She handed Cassie a card. It was thick, cream-colored cardstock with a simple, elegant address embossed on it. Cassie stared at the card, then back at the woman. A meeting with Gregory Bishop. It was a dream so old and buried she had forgotten she even had it. The rejections, the years of waitressing, the constant struggle, all of it had been a thick layer of dust covering that single glittering hope. The viral story was one thing, a GoFundMe was another, but this was different. This was real. This was a door opening, not into 15 minutes of fame, but back into the world she had been forced to leave behind. "I'll be there," Cassie said, her voice barely a whisper. As Monica Vance walked away, Cassie closed the door and leaned against it, the card clutched in her hand like a holy relic. The fear and anxiety that had plagued her morning began to recede, replaced by a terrifying, exhilarating flicker of hope. The world had seen her dance, but Gregory Bishop hadn't just seen a dance. He had seen a dancer. And for the first time in 4 long years, Cassandra Riley allowed herself to believe that she might be one again. Gregory Bishop's studio was exactly as Cassie had always imagined it. It was a cavernous space on the top floor of a pre-war building in the heart of the theater district. A wall of floor-to-ceiling windows flooded the room with the gray light of a New York morning, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The floors were worn, scarred oak, bearing the marks of countless hours of relentless work. One wall was covered entirely in mirrors, another in production photos from his legendary shows. The air smelled of sweat, lemon-scented floor polish, and ambition. It was the scent of her old life. Cassie felt painfully out of place in her best pair of jeans and a simple gray sweater. She had spent an hour that morning trying to decide what to wear, realizing with a pang that her entire wardrobe consisted of waitress uniforms and worn-out casual clothes. Gregory Bishop was sitting on a simple wooden stool in the center of the room, observing her as she walked in. He was smaller than she expected, a compact man with a wiry frame, piercing blue eyes, and a mane of wild silver hair. He wore a simple black turtleneck and black pants, the unofficial uniform of creative geniuses everywhere. "Miss Riley," he said. His voice was raspy, a product of too many cigarettes and too many hours shouting directions at actors. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Bishop. Thank you for inviting me," Cassie replied, her voice steadier than she felt. He gestured to the vast empty floor. "The other night." That was Astor Piazzolla's Libertango, a difficult piece. You didn't just dance it, you inhabited it. "I know the piece," she said. "Clearly," he replied, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "But it was more than that. I saw training in your movements, strong ballet fundamentals, but with a modern emotional core, the kind of training a specific institution is known for." He paused, his gaze sharp and analytical. "The Donovan Academy. Am I wrong?" Cassie's breath caught in her throat. "Yes, I was a student there. I didn't graduate." "I know," Bishop said simply. "I checked. Cassandra Riley, top of her class for 3 straight years, winner of the 2021 Choreography Prize. And then, in your final semester, you vanished." He stood up and began to walk around her in a slow circle, like a predator assessing its prey. "The official record says you withdrew for personal reasons. I'm more interested in the unofficial ones." The directness of the question disarmed her. She had spent 4 years deflecting that question with vague, face-saving answers, but looking into the choreographer's intense eyes, she felt the urge to tell the truth. "My father," she began, her voice quiet. "He owned a small construction supply business in Brooklyn, a family business started by my grandfather. It was his whole life. He put everything he had into it." She took a shaky breath, the memories still sharp and painful. He had a major contract with a developer for a new luxury condo project on the waterfront. It was the biggest deal of his career. He took out loans, hired extra staff, bought materials. Everything was riding on it. And then, 6 months into the project, the developer pulled out. They cited some obscure contractual loophole, a zoning issue they claimed their lawyers had just discovered. It was a lie. They'd found a cheaper supplier overseas and wanted to break the contract without penalty. Bishop had stopped, circling, and was listening intently. "My father was ruined," Cassie continued, her voice thick with emotion. "He lost the business, our house, everything. The stress, it triggered a massive heart attack. He survived, but he was never the same. The medical bills were astronomical. My scholarship to Donovan covered tuition, but it didn't cover rent or my mother's new caregiving costs. So I dropped out. I started working, taking any job I could get, waiting tables, catering, whatever paid the bills." A heavy silence settled in the studio. Gregory Bishop looked at her, his expression softened by a flicker of empathy. He had seen hundreds of young, hopeful artists chewed up and spat out by the harsh realities of life. "That's a heavy burden for a young artist to carry," he said quietly. "Talent requires oxygen to breathe. It's hard to find any when you're drowning." He paused, then asked the crucial question. "This developer, who were they?" Cassie hesitated. She had never spoken the name aloud in this context. It felt like giving power to a demon, but she owed him the full story. "The development company," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "was a subsidiary of Montgomery Corp." Gregory Bishop froze. The blood drained from his face, replaced by a look of dawning, horrified understanding. Montgomery Corp. The name hung in the air between them, suddenly charged with a terrible new significance. Preston Montgomery's family, he breathed. Yes, Cassie confirmed. I didn't know who he was that night at the gala, not at first. He was just another arrogant rich man in a suit. I only put it all together when I saw his full name in the news articles this morning. Preston Montgomery III. The irony was so thick, so cruel, it was almost suffocating. The man whose family had destroyed her dream was the same man who had, in a twisted act of fate, given her a chance to reclaim it. The cosmic cruelty of it was staggering. Bishop sank back onto his stool, running a hand through his wild hair. My God, he murmured, the universe has a sick sense of humor. He looked at Cassie, and his gaze was no longer just that of a director. It was something more. He saw the full picture now, the hidden prodigy, the family tragedy, the poetic, brutal collision of past and present in that ballroom. It wasn't just a good story. It was an epic. It was the kind of raw human drama he built his entire career on. I'm developing a new show, Miss Riley, he said, his voice regaining its command. It's called Echoes. It's about the ghosts of the past and how they shape our present. The lead role is a young woman who loses everything and has to fight her way back through her art. It's a demanding role. It requires a dancer of extraordinary technical skill and profound emotional depth. He stood up and walked to the mirrored wall, staring at his own reflection for a moment before turning back to her. I've auditioned over 300 dancers in New York, London, and Paris, he said. I haven't found her yet. He locked his eyes on Cassie's, and the air in the room became electric with possibility. I think I may have just found her serving champagne at a charity gala. He offered a rare, genuine smile. I'm not offering you an audition, Miss Riley. Auditions are for people I'm unsure about. I'm offering you the part. Cassie swayed on her feet, grabbing the ballet bar for support. The lead role in a Gregory Bishop production on Broadway? It was the dream, the impossible, ridiculous, long-dead dream being handed to her on a silver platter. It was too much, too fast. I haven't danced seriously in 4 years, she stammered. I'm out of practice. I'm not in shape. Muscle has memory. Bishop cut her off gently, and soul has it too. What I saw in that ballroom wasn't just technique. It was 4 years of anger and grief and fight, all channeled into 3 minutes of tango. You can't teach that. You can't fake that. We'll get you back into shape. We have the best trainers, the best physical therapists. All I need from you is the fire I saw the other night. He paused, his expression turning serious. The question is, do you still have it? Do you want it? Did she want it? It was like asking a starving person if they wanted a banquet. It was everything. Tears welled in her eyes, tears of shock, of relief, of terror, of overwhelming gratitude. She nodded, unable to speak. Good, Bishop said, clapping his hands together briskly. The moment of emotion over. Be here Monday morning, 6 a.m. sharp. Your new life begins then. As Cassie walked out of the studio and back into the harsh light of the city, the world looked different. The noise of the traffic sounded like an orchestra tuning up. The gray sky seemed full of promise. She had walked into that studio, a former dancer, a waitress, a victim of circumstance. She was walking out as the lead in a Broadway show. She had her life back. And now she realized she had something else too. She had power. The story was no longer just a humiliated waitress. It was about the star of Gregory Bishop's new show, a woman whose past was inextricably, tragically linked to the Montgomery family. And she knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that this story was far from over. The news that Cassandra Riley had been cast as the lead in Gregory Bishop's new Broadway show struck Montgomery Corp like a thunderbolt. The news, already a public relations nightmare, morphed into something far more potent. Cassie was no longer just the viral gala dancer. She was a real-life Cinderella, a prodigy whose comeback story made the Montgomery name synonymous with villain. The company's stock continued its downward slide as the narrative solidified. The Montgomerys didn't just bully waitresses, they crushed dreams. In his penthouse office, Preston Montgomery Jr. knew the strategy of silence had failed. Action was required, swift, decisive, and public. He summoned his son, who appeared looking like a ghost in a $1,000 suit. "You will make a public apology," Preston Jr. stated, his voice devoid of warmth. He slid a single sheet of paper across the mahogany desk. "Our PR team has prepared a statement. You will read it verbatim at a press conference tomorrow." Preston III scanned the page filled with hollow corporate jargon. "This is useless," he muttered. "No one will believe this." "Belief is not the objective," his father retorted, his voice dangerously cold. "The objective is to create a public record of contrition. It's a business maneuver, not an act of conscience. It signals to our investors that the problem is being managed. Your feelings are irrelevant. Your only job is to look remorseful and read the script." Faced with his father's icy ultimatum, Preston III gave a sullen nod. His public life was over. This was merely the funeral. The press conference was a predictable circus. Preston III stood at the podium, a walking effigy of privilege, and read the statement in a flat monotone. He looked not at the reporters, but at a fixed point on the back wall, his delivery so lifeless that the words "deeply regret" sounded like an insult. The moment he finished, the questions erupted like gunfire. "Mr. Montgomery, have you apologized to Miss Riley personally?" a reporter yelled. "Is it true your family's company bankrupted her father?" another shouted. Ignoring every question, Preston III was whisked from the stage by security, leaving a vacuum of rage and unanswered accusations. The media's verdict was instantaneous and brutal. It was a coward's apology, a soulless performance that only deepened the public's contempt. In Gregory Bishop's studio, Cassie watched the spectacle on a small television during a break. Every muscle in her body screamed from the unfamiliar, rigors of her first day of training. But that pain was nothing compared to the cold anger that settled in her stomach as she watched Preston III's performance. The apology was a carefully constructed lie, a bandage placed on the wrong wound. It addressed the dare, the fleeting moment of public shame, while completely ignoring the colossal, life-altering devastation his family had wrought upon hers. That to them was still just business. The hollow words meant to silence the story instead ignited a fire in Cassie. For 4 years, she had been a victim of their business. Now she had a voice. Bishop watched her, seeing the shift in her eyes from exhaustion to steely resolve. She didn't need his encouragement. She pulled out her phone and dialed the one person who had treated her story with respect from the beginning. "Nate," she said when the photographer answered, "it's Cassandra Riley. I'm ready to talk, and I want to tell the whole story." 2 days later, Nate Crow's follow-up article was published online, and it was a bombshell. The headline itself was a declaration of war. "The Dancer's Debt: Cassandra Riley on the True Cost of the Montgomery Empire." Guided by Nate's questions, Cassie didn't just recount the events of the gala, she unspooled the entire painful history. With quiet, devastating dignity, she told the story of her father, his thriving business, and the ruthless, predatory contract loophole Montgomery Corp had used to shatter their lives. She wasn't seeking pity or revenge. She was simply stating the facts, connecting the son's casual cruelty at the gala to the father's calculated cruelty in the boardroom. The impact was seismic. The narrative was no longer about a rich bully getting his comeuppance. It was a story of systemic corporate malfeasance, of a family empire built on the wreckage of smaller lives. Dancer's debt exploded across social media. Government regulators began making inquiries into the waterfront project mentioned in the article. The Montgomery name was now officially toxic. Alone in his penthouse, Preston Montgomery Jr. finally understood the scope of his miscalculation. This was no longer a PR crisis he could manage. Cassandra Riley, armed with nothing but her story, had proven to be a more formidable adversary than any corporate rival. He had spent his life believing money was power, but he now faced a terrifying, immutable truth. A story told with courage had a power all its own. His son hadn't just dared a waitress to dance, he had unleashed the truth. In the end, this was never just about a dance. It was dignity. Cassandra Riley's story is a powerful testament to the fact that true worth isn't measured in bank accounts or family names, but in talent, resilience, and the courage to stand up for your truth. A $10,000 dare, meant to be an act of public humiliation, became the catalyst that exposed a rod of arrogance and reignited a dream that had been unjustly extinguished. Cassie didn't just steal the spotlight, she reclaimed her life, her art, and her voice, proving that the most powerful currency in the world isn't money, it's integrity. Preston Montgomery learned that the hard way, a lesson that cost his family's reputation far more than any tip could ever be worth. If Cassie's incredible journey from a forgotten artist to a symbol of defiance moved you, please help us share her story by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that it's never too late to fight for your dreams. And make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications for more true stories that matter. We want to hear from you. What part of Cassie's story resonated with you the most? Let us know in the comments below.